let's jump right in. Here's the agenda for today. Pretty simple. The agronomy update. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about rootless corn syndrome and why am I even talking about it. And then also soybean aphids have made an early appearance in the western part of the U.S. So just want to touch on that a little bit. And then we're really fortunate this morning to have Jamie Brand, Ram from Iowa, join us. Jamie's been doing a lot of work on measuring nitrogen movement, nitrogen conversion. And so we thought it'd be great for Jamie to share his learnings and understandings with us this morning about how that nitrogen is moved in the soil. Let's talk about rootless corn syndrome and soybean aphids. So what in the world is rootless corn or floppy corn syndrome? Well, many parts of the country this year have been very, very hot and very, very dry on the surface of the soil. I got these pictures from Purdue's website, and if you look at how roots form, you can obviously, in that picture on the left, you can see the seeds, and then you have the nodal roots that start forming. Really, the corn plant has two root systems, the seminal root system and the nodal roots. And those nodal roots start forming at the crown where you see that arrow pointing. And the growing point, or the meristematic tissue, the tissue that expands to grow those roots, is right in the tip of those nodal roots. If those roots start hitting really, really hot, very, very dry soil, they actually, the cells, the meristematic cells or tissues that grow and expand, in those conditions, they can actually die off or desiccate and dry up. I know there's a lot of folks that have the opinion, for instance, that roots will grow to moisture. They actually don't. Roots will follow a moisture line down through the soil profile, but they don't, quote unquote, grow into moisture. In fact, when these nodal roots start forming, if they hit that really hot, dry soil, again, the growing points right in the tip will desiccate and die off, and we won't get any nodal root formation. In fact, many years you can go out and be corn that's, oh gosh, halfway up my calf, and all of a sudden, like that picture on the right, it'll start leaning over or flopping over. And when you dig it up, basically all you see is the seed and the seminal root and no root formation, okay? So very hot, dry soils, that's one of the causes, and then you get a strong wind and it'll push them over. Now there are some things, there are conditions, things that we do that can actually make the problem worse. You know, this year, because of delayed planting in some areas, maybe we push the envelope a little bit on planting. When you get sidewall smearing, or maybe if we plant just a little bit wet, as it gets hot and dry, those sidewalls obviously get dry and hard as well, and it's harder for those nodal roots to penetrate through the sidewall and the seed trench. So again, anything that makes it more difficult for that nodal root system to form will make the problem worse. Shallower planting, those soils dry quicker, they heat up quicker because they don't have as much moisture in them. Cloddy seed beds, for the same reason, again, you get drying and heating quicker in those conditions. And again, if we plant it in little wetter conditions, if that seed slot opens up, again, it gets dry, it gets hard, so it makes it much more challenging for the nodal root system to move into the soil. In the old days, we used to tell folks, hey, get a cultivator and throw soil up against the plant. And sometimes that's successful, sometimes it's not, simply because it's still dry soil and it's still pretty hot soil. Really, the best cure to deal with floppy corn syndrome is rain and cooler temperatures. And once that happens, those nodal roots will recover and begin to grow again. I will tell you, I'm amazed and have been amazed over the years how big that corn can be, and it'll still survive even off the seminal root system for a while. So just be aware. I would not be surprised if in some areas where they didn't get this last rain, where it is really, really hot and really dry, you can go and dig up and just check to see if the nodal roots are forming or not. It's not necessarily, again, a death knell, but we've got to get rain or cooler temperatures to allow those nodal roots to start growing through the soil. The other thing I just wanted to hit on real quick is soybean aphids. I was reading a Iowa State Pest and Crop newsletter the other day, and there were reports that in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota, soybean aphids had started to make an appearance. And I thought, well, maybe it'd be a good idea to touch on that a little bit. They overwinter in buckthorn, and they typically will move into leguminous crops in late June and early July. This year it's been a little earlier than normal, not necessarily unheard of, but to start seeing them this early is it's a little earlier than normal. They're typically favored by cooler temps, and the populations can build very, very quickly. They can double their populations in a few days under the right conditions. One of the things that's a little bit unique about soybean aphid is the female, believe it or not, she can more or less clone herself. she can have young that are females that will be able to start producing very, very quickly, and that's why their populations can double in a hurry. There are a lot of natural predators, Asian ladybird beetles, the minute pirate bug, and I would tell you, if your populations are low and you see a lot of these natural predators, you should think about that before you necessarily go out and spray, because I have seen instances where as it gets hot and the predator population builds up, it does knock the population down. It's not common, but it can happen. And you should understand that if you hit them with an insecticide, you'll definitely take out the predators as well in those cases. They are a piercing, sucking insect. They remove plant juices. And the one thing I would tell you is that it's more important when we're under water stress on the soybeans. It's stress on top of stress. The threshold will change depending on the amount of stress in the field. If there's lots of moisture, the growing conditions are good, that plant can withstand some of the damage much easier than it can if it's under a lot of water stress. Also, the aphids themselves will produce a sooty mold, and you'll get this black coating. That's a saprophytic fungi that will move on to those leaves. It can actually interfere with photosynthesis if it gets really, really heavy. The thresholds will vary a little bit from state to state. I would just encourage you to check with your local university. I live in Indiana. Typically, we say a 250 per plant, and again, that varies with the growth stage and it varies with the stress level. So it's not a hard, fast rule, but that's a good place to start. If they're under moisture stress, that number may be a little bit lower. Now, I always get the question, who in the world is going to count them, right? And here's kind of an easy, I guess let's say a rule of thumb, is that if you start seeing populations build on the stem, that in essence, that means you've got around 400 per plant. And the reason for that is the stem that's not the best place to eat in town. So if you've got populations moving to the stem, and you see them down there, that means you've probably got around 400 per plant. So pay close attention as your plants start moving into the reproductive stages, because this is the critical stage. Just watch, see if the thresholds, see if the populations are building or declining. Again, if it's cool and maybe dry, you can expect the stress level to be higher on the plant from the dryness, but the cool temperatures will build those populations quicker. There's a lot of products that'll work. I would just encourage you to check with your local agronomist or university. There's lots of options. And we did a call probably more than a month ago about the sugarcane aphid. Actually, there's not as many treatments for sugarcane aphids, but with soybean aphids, there's a lot of good options. Again, make sure you monitor to see if the populations are increasing or not. Check for natural predators just before you go out and spray. Again, you kind of got to look at the situation, examine all the factors. If the population may be declining and you start to see more and more predators, and the temperatures are hotter, maybe you don't necessarily spray. And by the way, if you're not necessarily in the R stages. So the other thing I would encourage you to do is make sure you take note of pre-harvest intervals. There are some pretty long pre-harvest intervals on some of the products you might use and shorter ones on others. So just be aware of the products you're using, be aware of the pre-harvest intervals. Don't just spray and walk away. Again, when you spray, you're gonna kill off the natural predators as well. And again, these populations can build very quickly. I would tell you, again, if you don't get in a good kill underneath the canopy, they can repopulate very, very quickly. That's why, frankly, we think something like an undercover that allows you to spray and get underneath that canopy and really direct spray at the stems and the underneath side of the leaves has some excellent advantages in a situation like this. But if you don't use an undercover and you're spraying over the top, it's hard to get penetration down into the canopy and on the stem. So don't just spray and walk away. Make sure that you scout it even after you spray it. Make sure that you are paying attention to the population dynamics as you go. All right, that was quick, but I am going to switch gears right now, and I'm going to turn it over to Jamie Brand. Jamie, again, is our RAM out in Iowa. And Jamie's out in Iowa right now, and Jamie's going to tell you a little bit more about his early findings on the importance of nitrogen placement and the ability of the plant to reach your nitrogen. So, Jamie, take it away.
All right. Again, appreciate everybody being on the call today. I'm going to take the next about 20, maybe 25 minutes, and we're going to walk through a couple different scenarios. One is a field of fall anhydrous. That is basically was designed to be the complete package of nitrogen, and we're going to walk through where that is in the profile, how much we've lost, and then we're going to talk a little bit of a story as to why we've lost that. I've been blessed to be soil scanning for 2 years, and I saw very different things last year than I saw this year. So it just reminds us that we're in an environment that changes from year to year, and management is going to be key if we want to consistently be efficient and maximize our input. The second one is actually going to be 3 applications. This field that we're going to talk about today has 3 applications of nitrogen, and you're going to be surprised at where that nitrogen is in adjacent to the likelihood of efficiency of uptake. So those are really the 2 scenarios, and then we're going to take a few minutes to kind of to go through why it is what it is, and just maybe help you with some of those scenarios and talks when a guy says, well, I'm already putting 2 applications on, or I'm already putting 3 on, or I don't lose nitrogen. Just trying to walk through some of actually the facts that we found. So just real quick, and you guys have seen this a lot of times, but I still think, even though I've seen it 100 times and presented it 100 times, I am still baffled by the fact that, you know, for doing this for 15 years, I've really looked at this more 10x times than I did in the last year than I did in the 14 before. Just understanding when our plants need it and where it is in the profile. So if you've got a 200 bushel corn crop, you will roughly need 220 pounds of nitrogen to build grain and infrastructure. And so just in rough uptake needs, about 55 pounds of that nitrogen is needed V8 before, and about 165 pounds is needed after V8. So when you're looking at some of these scenarios, and I have the 10th of June marked up there, granted, we're past that. Some of our corn is there. Now, I will tell you that in every field I go into, based on what I think, the corn is further along than I think. A lot of corn I'll walk in and I'll think it's a V6 based on height or based on a paradigm that I have, and we're actually closer to V8. So even though that corn may be shorter, it is still getting ramped up for rapid uptake. In its mind, it doesn't care about plant height, it cares about stage and age of that plant. So keep in mind that. The one thing I don't want you to also forget about is sulfur. 52% of sulfur is uptaken after R1. So if you're talking to growers about why drop application, sulfur is a great synergistic way to add performance of the plant, efficiency of the nitrogen. So I'm not going to show a slide on that, but I did want to mention that. So this is scenario number 1 that we're going to talk about. So if you look at this cornfield, it looks very, very nice. This is one of the better fields that we have here in central Iowa. And so I started asking the farmer questions. He wanted to go out and he wanted to test this field. And he had already put on, he had already had 3 applications of nitrogen on here. Everything looked good. Farmer felt great about it. Corn looked great. But the question is where is that nitrogen in the profile? And how efficient were those 3 applications? And we're certainly not here to be critical. We're learning right alongside of you. And so now with Soil Scan, we can go run 18 bags of dirt in 2 hours or 3 hours, and we have now learned something. So I went back to that field and I laid that board down that you'll see on the right of the screen, and I started pulling every core because I wanted to see, and you'll see my board, the very first hole sits right in the row of the plant. And all of you guys probably have boards made from the center of the first hole to the center of the last hole is 27 inches because the majority of our banding is done on 30-inch centers. So we want to assure that we're in the band once and only once. So the question is, in the next slide, we're going to start understanding where this nitrogen is and how should you feel about it, and is there something that we can do better. So just a few facts on this field. Previous crop was corn. We had a fall application of NH3 at 100 pounds. We had 40 pounds of weed and feed at the time of the chemical application broadcasted, 80 pounds of UAN with a coulter bar in the middle of the row. It was put on, since it had been put on and I had tested, we had 6/10 of rain, and it was applied on the 28th of May, and I sampled it roughly about 2 weeks later. So I laid the board down across the row. I had no idea what I would find. I did not know where the anhydrous mark was. You know, the beautiful thing of the soil scan is it starts to paint a picture that we assumed before. So pull the 0 to 12, a 12 to 24 core to gauge where that nitrate was in comparison to the part of the root system. And so here are the results. So if you look at this, as you'll see on the right, the very first hole where the corn plant is, hole number 1 was in the row. And then I worked myself across. So what I expected to see that the anhydrous knife would not be right in the center of the row. I expected that I would have probably 2 different spikes, knowing that the anhydrous was probably not predominantly in the top 12, but we would still have some in the bottom 12. But what I found is that when this gentleman went out, the way he RTK'd it, it happened to be that the ammonia knife fell right in the middle of each row. So as I came across, I'm getting 25 pounds per acre in the top 12, 43 in the bottom 12, and as you'll see as you go across there, and basically where we got to the coulter, where the spike was, which is pretty much right in the center of the row, we're seeing that is where we're sitting with all of our available plant nitrate. The graph is off by just a little bit because hole number 1 was the center of the row. Hole number 9 was actually 3 inches off of the row. So it's actually closer to the center of the row. It just looks a little bit off balance. So with both the anhydrous application and the coulter application, we were seeing that basically in the middle of the row. So the corn plant is quite a bit away from that. So when a grower looks at that and he says, I've done 3 applications, but how efficient am I? And so the thing is I would much rather see these applications right up next to the row. So what I'm going to be doing here shortly is going out to fields that are wide drop and look at that distribution and see where that spike is up around the corn plant because of that wide drop application instead of a coulter being in the center of the row. This is just another look at it, a little bit more in-depth level. The information is up top. And like I said, I believe Jim and Caitlin will be sharing these with you. And I would hope that maybe some of these slides make you curious. I would love for you guys to share data back with us as to what you're finding out in similar situations like this that you're sharing with your growers. Because in this situation, this grower is saying, I'm already doing 3 applications. I've got an in-season application, but the question is, can I do better? And this grower actually now owns a wide drop system, which he will be running. So,
Jamie, the other thing amazing to me, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that how much of that nitrogen's in that 12 to 24 inch depth, those orange graph bars. There's a lot of it that's moved pretty deep with not a lot of rain.
Yeah, that's a good point. The one thing I will tell you is here in Iowa, and I believe in areas like Texas where we've had a lot of rain, and areas throughout parts of Illinois and east, coming out of fall applied nitrogen by about and you'll see this shortly, by about April and then even into March, we had more of that in the 12 to 24 than we had in the top 12. So you're going to see pretty much everything I'm showing you today is more in the top 12, in the bottom 12 than there is in the top 24, and you can pretty much see that across that graph. So that is certainly concerning when we start talking about finishing this crop. So what is the summary of this particular field? Similar to what Jim said, the average of sitting, the average of the ppm is sitting higher in the 12 to 24 in comparison to the 0 to 12. In this situation, the knife of the anhydrous bar and the coulter were applied in the middle of the row. It was not intended to be that way. The farmer did not say, I'm going to do that. But that was a square field. We went back and, went back and forth with the ammonia bar. We used a lot of guidance, which is fantastic. But, even though, we thought that was actually both the coulter and the anhydrous were designed to be a full soil profile charge. And I think what you're seeing with what we're finding is we are not charging the whole profile. That is staying in a very tight band. And similar to what Jim said, roots, a lot of people think when it's dry weather, roots just grow because they go to find water. They actually follow it. And so that's why we're seeing some of the things we're seeing in the field. The majority of the plant available nitrate is 13 to 14 inches away from the row. How efficient is this application, and could we do better? And that's where you guys as 360 dealers, with the message, with the curiosity that you have, with the desire to help growers to be more efficient, we have a solution. So at the end of the day, if this gentleman raises 220 bushel corn and he has no nitrogen deficiency, I would therefore say we over-applied nitrogen, because we are never going to get to all that nitrogen in the middle of that row. So let's go to scenario number 2. And this is a field that many of us see. We're seeing the striping from the anhydrous knife, and this is a very good farmer. Very passionate. It's a set of brothers that get after it. They put their ammonia on in the fall, plant in the spring, get it done, and this is a striped field. And before I really dove into nitrogen, I'm like, this is just the way it is. It will get to the nitrogen. And what I'm learning is that I don't know if it's as much getting to the nitrogen in a full charge as much as we're starting to mineralize organic manure that's helping us bring color back into that plant. Because the nitrogen is still quite a ways away in places because that band is tight. And we're going to look at that here in just a minute. But this is the look of the field. And this is right where those samples came from that we're going to be looking at here in a second. So I went out with my board again, and it was very crystal clear where the ammonia track was. Because we had, as you'll see on the right, the corn there on the left was not not near nitrogen. And you can actually see the small yellow leaf on the bottom, and I'll show you a picture here shortly. I believe it's in this deck. That's going to be a little bit better. But that was a V6 growth stage plant, and it was indeficient. And a V6 corn plant needs to uptake roughly probably about 40 pounds of nitrogen per acre, and it's not getting it. You'll see the V7 plant beside it, much more robust and a much larger root mass. They're white, they're wet, a lot of root hairs. I mean, there's eons difference between these two plants getting started. So if you look at the graph on the right, or excuse me, on the left, you'll see that distribution. In the top is 0 to 12, which again you will see if you look at these charts that we have more in the 12 to 24 than we do in the 0 to 12. So you will see that spike of where that ammonia knife went. So there's 64 pounds per acre at the peak in the 12 to 24 versus 14 on the lower end where that other plant is residing. And more importantly, I suppose, it would be in the top. You're seeing the spike of just being able to feed those plants. And one thing we did last year is we were able to go in well into June, into July, and even into August, and we're able to still find that knife. And I think as we've learned more about our plants and our root systems, we just want to be able to feed within the heart of the root system as best we can. We're not out here to say, boy, this is wrong. We just are out to be efficient, grow higher yielding corn, more nitrogen use efficiency, and just making sure that the farmer applied nutrients are on target more than they're off target. So as you'll see here on both of these pictures, I guess we'll look at the one on the right. You can see the different stocks, the stock strength. You can see the nitrogen burn deficiency on the leaves. We have a very unhappy plant on the left. So in theory, really, we're sitting there with a V6 plant that has no farmer-applied nitrogen versus a plant on the right that has been blessed to be very close to the farmer-applied nitrogen strip. So that is really the strong difference. If no nitrogen was ever applied to that field, they would all look like the one on the left. And if we would have had a very uniform broadcast, that whole field would look like the one on the right. And the question always comes is in the fall, we walk in the field and we see variability from ear to ear, and we just can't figure it out. And I think a lot of this is going to stem to how we get these plants started. And as we continue to make sure that our corn does not have a bad day, I think along with what we're doing with planters and nitrogen placement, nutrient placement, we're going to just continue to add yield by more consistent ears. This is just another shot of that field. So those are really the two scenarios that I wanted you to think about based on your knowledge, your clientele base. What are some of the conversations that you can take back to those farmers and just talk about efficiency and placement when the plant uptakes it. This field right here, if you can just visualize through it, there are about 6-inch strips all the way through that field that are high, and then there is the strip where basically none of that, very little of that farmer applied nitrogen has got itself out. So the summary of this slide is, and what is the gap? So the samples I took in the last year, higher PPA, again in the 12 to 24 than it is in the 0 to 12. Field color may be coming back, but the growth stage is not. Nitrogen in the soil profile is ahead of the crop. The UA and Coulter application will have a similar movement as slide 2. So, whether it be an NH3 band or a Coulter band, we're seeing the same type of very tight band. So the bottom line is this farmer applied 180 pounds of nitrogen in the fall. He's hoping for 220 bushel corn. And I went out of here, and from spending 5-6 hours in this field, and you've not seen everything I've done, he is 70 to 80 pounds short of nitrogen to reach his yield potential, even after you figure the organic release as well. So of all the work that I've done in these areas, I'm estimating that this field has lost of farmer applied N about 40% of its fall applied nitrogen for 72 pounds. So it was hard for this farmer to swallow that he needed another 70 pounds. I still don't know today if he's going to apply it. But I think the picture is pretty clear with the type of weather that we've had, that when we get this much nitrogen movement in the 12 to 24 that early, we know it's converted and we know it's moved down even at times early on with very little water. So one thing I want to go in, I'm not going to get real deep into this, but this is the story of what's gone on since these November applications and how it's different from what I saw a year ago. So we're just going to hit on a couple of these. And, if you look in the very top, you'll see 2 different test dates, and this is a manure. And the difference was about 45 days from 416 to 530. We saw in the knife at 416 already 95 pounds per acre of available plant nitrate. By 530, we had already been shoving some of that down to the 12 to 24. And through that time frame, you'll see the 12 to 24 actually come up. If you look at the medium soils in that swine manure situation, on 416 already we had 294 pounds per acre of available nitrogen. We had a significant amount of rain in that time, and we lost a significant amount of that to denitrification. So it's just trying to understand that in a lot of cases, our crop is chasing our nitrogen application. It's actually chasing it. We make a lot of our applications well before the crop needs it, and it is just panting and screaming to stay up in touch with that in some years, and that's really where we're at today. And in a lot of cases, it can't keep up, and it won't keep up, and we're seeing ourselves on everything that I've tested, we're about 40 to 110 pounds short. So this is kind of a summary of this: 210 pounds of applied fall manure, no instinct. The 0 to 12 depth on April 16th was 195. It went down to 55 on May 30th. So we're just seeing a lot of different changes with weather and volatility and denitrification. This gentleman, has 210 pounds of nitrogen on there, he's going to have to come back with probably 100 pounds to finish this. As you look in the 12 to 24, not a lot of change. We did flush some of that down, which tells me the difference in that was denitrification. You know, and you just see that in the 15 inches off a knife, which we test. So basically what we're looking at on the left is farmer applied nitrogen plus residual. And then basically the balance to the right is just understanding what the soil has in it based on just residual nitrogen or a small amount of mineralization. So this is another field. I went out on January 22nd, and I just wanted to see where the soil ended up after the fall weather that we had with nitrogen. And so on 122, I went out with the generator and the drill, and I started trying to understand where it ended up at. And what I found out is we did not lose a lot of nitrogen in November and December. Yes, it was wet. Yes, it was warm, but we were still pretty much in the ammonium form. But that changed very quickly when we got into March. So, and you guys will have these slides, but if you look predominantly from like 3.9 to even 3.29, we had an enormous jump in conversion. And then if you jump for another 10 days later, another enormous jump in basically the conversion from ammonium to nitrate. So when I talk about a crop that is just screaming to keep up with where our nitrogen is, in this case, we were well converted, pretty much completely converted before the crop was ever planted. So the summary with that here is, you know, we did have a stabilized, and I will tell you that NSERV does work. It stabilized. It basically protected a barrier around that much better. And basically, it was protected for it basically. How do I want to say this? When I was reading them, the stabilized was half of what the unstabilized was. So it definitely kept it in ammonium longer. As the soils warmed up, it broke down pretty quick. And at the end of the day, it was, by the time we were getting into May, it was pretty much screaming along. So if you look at this, stabilized over the knife, which is the first column there with numbers, you can see how those numbers jumped. Not a lot of change in January to March. March 9th came, March 29th came, April 8th came, all before this crop was planted. So this is kind of the story of why we are where we're at today in a lot of our fields. So really today, as you go out to your growers, growers have three options. If you go out to them and you say, boy, you know, based on our soil scanning, you are 80 pounds short. And then the next question is, he's going to say, well, what are my options? Well, you've got the three options laying in front of you. You've got post-urea on the right. You've got Coulter in the middle. And then you've got Y-drop. And actually, this picture of Y-drop is actually taken from dealer training just a few days ago. So the bottom line is the two right ones are designed to charge the whole profile. They're designed to charge the whole profile. The idea is that is going to flush completely out. It's going to be efficiently getting into the roots. You know, post-urea is going to be, part of it's going to be in the middle, part of it's going to be in the row. And so the question is if a grower says, I need 80 pounds, the next question you should say, how are you going to apply it? If you're going to apply it with a Y-drop, I'm comfortable with putting on 80 pounds because I believe you're going to get a very high amount of that product into that plant, into that heart of that root. You can't do any better than that. If you're going to put in the Coulter, remember the slides that I showed you earlier. And if you're going to broadcast it, again, you're going to basically lose at least 33% of that based on what we've learned. And I believe that it's probably going to be more than that. So if you look at the next slide here, this is some stuff from Fred Below. And he's really talking about roots today, not corn plants that we used to plant back when we planted 28,000, 27,000. But a lot of the corn plants that we're planting today at higher populations for higher ear count, this is about the width of that root system. Now, I know if you dig a root pit, you're going to see more coming out. I'm very aware of that. And I would recommend that you guys do dig root pits. But, you know, this is the part of the root system that we're going to feed. And I, for one, always thought, boy, we need to have a large, robust root system really branching in order to make this thing work. And Fred Beela will be quick to say, we don't need large roots, we need efficient roots. And we need to know where our roots are, and we need to know how to feed them. And so that's really one thing I want you to think of. When you go out to a field and you look at nitrogen, dig up a plant. Take a spade, make a 6-inch circle around it. Be careful pulling them out, and really look at where the heart of those roots are and how's the best way to feed them, and show that to the grower. You know what? We learn a lot of things about roots, and we just take time to dig them up and understand what is really feeling through that field. So the one thing I want to challenge you guys at, and the way I think about this, is if you look at your field, and this is that field that had the 3 applications, and right now the hot band is where that orange flag is. And this corn's taken off, and we've paid a lot of money. This gentleman has 100 plus 40 plus 80. He has 220 pounds of nitrogen on this, and if we say on average that's 50 cents, it won't quite be that. You know, he's got in the upwards of over $100 worth of nitrogen on there. And the question is, from a standpoint, how good of an investment was that, or could that have been a better investment? So what we really need to think about is we are farming between the red lines. The majority of uptake is between those lines. Once we get canopied, the majority of the water is going to be funneled between those red lines. And trying to help guys understand that and embracing some of the technology that you have, I think will really help a grower be more efficient. So with that, Jim, I'm going to let you grab the controls. You've got a little bit to build on as far as the weather that we've seen. The one thing I would challenge you as dealers, if you go out and you do a soil scan and a grower says, there's no way I need 100 pounds. There's just no way. There's just no way. Go put on 70. Go put on 50 and leave a strip. You know, help us learn. I would tell you that if these situations where we have this nitrogen this much off target and we are not nutrient deficient, we are applying too much nitrogen, and we need to learn more about the corn plant. So, you know, walk with the growers on this. I think we're all learning. But with that, Jim, I'm going to pass that back to you.
Real quick, Jamie, I'm going to add 2 things before we wrap this up. There's only 2 more slides to go here. Number one, you mentioned about roots and root structure and the need or the lack thereof for large root system. Some of you may be aware I spent a number of years in the corn germplasm business, and I will tell you the highest yielding male inbred that has come out probably in the last 30 years had one of the smallest root systems I've ever seen. So you're right. You don't have to have great big robust root systems to be high yielding. Second thing I'll share, Jamie, you mentioned this earlier as well. I was driving through west central Indiana yesterday and just noticed areas of fields lighter yellow, green, and started pulling off at some of these fields. And I have seen, in fact, I saw it on Tuesday as well, sulfur deficiencies showing up pretty broadly through parts of Indiana. Can't speak for other areas. I've heard other people talking about it. But you mentioned sulfur in with Y-drop. Again, there are a lot of farmers I know who would benefit from adding 1 pound of sulfur for every 10 pounds of nitrogen. So 2 more slides. And I just wanted to share this with you because, Jamie, if you look, you can see the precipitation. This is from NOAA, and it's the precipitation. Those of you who are dealer training saw this, November to April. And you're wondering, why in the world is all that nitrogen in 12 to 24? Well, they were near record or record rainfall in that November to April time frame. And once that nitrogen started converting, nitrate's not held by the soil. Obviously, it moved pretty deep in the profile. So you can see that was probably a pretty big deal and a contributor to some of the numbers that Jamie was showing you. The other thing I'll show you is it was also darn near record temperatures during that November to April time frame as well. So again, warm it up, rain it down, and that's why, to a greater extent, as we started converting the ammonium form to nitrate, we start seeing that movement down to that 12 to 24 inch band. And the problem is, if you look at a V6 or a V4 plant, their roots are not, number one, getting that deep, and number two, in a lot of areas, these roots are trying to go back to we talked about rootless corn. They will not grow and proliferate into dry soil. Again, they'll follow a moisture line down through the soil, but they don't grow into dry soil. So if your soil's drying out and you go and your nitrogen's 12 to 24, it's not a good combination right now. And I think that's part of the equation of what we're seeing in some of these fields. So we had 0.8 of an inch yesterday and dug in my yard after about an hour and a half after that 0.8, and it was powder about 3 inches deep. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. Everybody stay safe. That's the most important thing. Let us know. Contact your RAM if you have any questions. Otherwise, we're going to end the webinar now. Have a great day, everybody.